Hello and welcome to the History of Philosophy in China by Peter Adamson and Karen Lai, brought to you with the support of the Philosophy Department at King's College London and the LMU in Munich, online at historyofphilosophy.net. Today's episode, To Become or Not to Become, the Confucians on Our Moral Natures. Perhaps everyone wonders at least sometimes what being human is all about. Admittedly, philosophers probably spend more time on this than other people. They might, for example, try to define the unique, specialized capacities that belong only to humankind, like those we use to handle complicated cognitive processes and complex emotional states. But who has not admired certain people as outstanding examples of humanity, like sportspersons, artists, Nobel Prize winners, and ordinary people who sacrifice their lives and daily comforts in the service of others? We also think about our own more modest pursuits, sometimes wondering whether they are worthwhile and whether to pursue a different course. We're able to ponder such questions because we are reflective beings, and sometimes we try to do better. Warring States thinkers reflected on similar questions and engaged in discourse about human nature. Their debates about what makes us unique center on our cognitive, moral, and social capacities. However, they disagreed on whether and how these should be harnessed and honed to help us live well together. As we have seen in an earlier episode, Yang Tzu believes that whatever is incipient in human nature should be preserved as much as possible. Human nature should be shielded from the corrupting influences of political scheming and perhaps of social life more generally. Mengzi shares the view that some influences from society are detrimental to human nature. However, Mengzi and Xunzi, the two major Confucian philosophers of the Warring States period, disagree with Yang Tzu that humans should be cloistered from social and political life. It's a fundamental claim of Confucian philosophy that our naturally given capacities and dispositions should be cultivated. For the Confucians, human nature holds much promise, especially if most people exemplify benevolence in their interactions through practicing propriety. But we're also aware that Mengzi and Xunzi hold very different views about human nature and about what is needed to enable us to do better. This means taking a closer look at what Mengzi and Xunzi think about our moral capacities and dispositions and how we can work with them. We should think of their projects as attempts to improve human lives through an ethical quest. That might seem a surprisingly idealistic description, especially when it comes to Xunzi, who is often thought to be quite pessimistic about humans and their tendencies. And it's true that Mengzi in particular sees human nature as a resource that can be used to make a better world. But while Xunzi holds that human nature is self-serving, he too believes that humans are resourceful and have the wherewithal to turn this around. This is something we already began to argue in the episode in which we introduced him to you. To understand their views on cultivation more fully, we'll look at what some other texts during the Warring States period have to say about these issues. Many Warring States thinkers shared the belief that human nature is endowed by heaven, but we need to think carefully about what this means and consider which aspects of humanity are included in their views. Sometimes the texts hint at heaven as a creator of humankind, but this doesn't mean that heaven is personified, nor that Chinese philosophers thought about heaven in similar terms to a creator god, as conceived in the Islamic or Jewish traditions. It would be fair to say that in Warring States Confucian texts, there's more interest in heaven as the justification for morality than in heaven as an ongoing source of sustenance for all manner of life in the world, or indeed of the world itself. To put this simply, some thinkers named heaven as the source of morality to give more weight to their moral values or principles. It was heaven, rather than humans, who required that people act in this way or that. Here's an example of how the Mengzi appeals to heaven as a creator of humankind to add weight to its views. He quotes a passage from the Book of Odes that speaks about heaven as giving birth to humanity, and then says emphatically that it is the source of morality. Heaven gives birth to the people. For each thing, there are its basic principles. The people are guided by these, cherishing this desirable good. This passage also mentions the four Mengzian virtues: benevolence, moral rightness, propriety, and wisdom, and appeals to heaven primarily to highlight that being virtuous in this way is what we are meant to be. This is the kind of being we are. There are basic principles, in Chinese 'zi', for everything, and it is our human calling to appreciate how we stand in relation to each other and how we should orient ourselves in a larger and more inclusive context beyond humanity. The aim is not then to understand precisely what heaven is or how it has given birth to the people. In a future episode, we'll further consider the idea of heaven in the context of Confucian philosophy's religious dimensions. Another way to think about human nature is to consider what makes humans distinctive as compared with other animals and beings. Sun Tzu presents a clear and helpful way to think about humankind, emphasizing both its continuities with and differences from other animals. Water and fire have qi, or vital energies, but are without life. Grasses and trees have life, but are without awareness. Birds and beasts have awareness, but are without yi, rightness. Humans have qi and life and awareness, and moreover, they have yi. And so they are the most precious things under heaven. They are not as strong as oxen or as fast as horses, but oxen and horses are used by them. How is this so? I say it is because humans are able to form communities while the animals cannot. Why are humans able to form communities? I say it is because of social divisions. How can social divisions be put into practice? I say it is because of yi, rightness. Although Sun Tzu does not specifically refer to the word human nature here, he does allude to the attributes that distinguish humans from other beings. The way he thinks about the characteristics of different things is simple to grasp, and much of it would make sense to us. He begins with vital energies, qi, which we could loosely call matter. Like matter, qi is an aspect of all existence, but not everything that exists is a living thing. So, while grasses and trees have life, water and fire do not. The next attribute is awareness or knowledge, which all animals have. Sun Tzu doesn't bother here to make precise distinctions between more and less complex animal capacities, so for present purposes, all animals are placed on the same level. The final attribute is yi, which refers to a capacity for moral rightness. This is uniquely human, and our sense of rightness is critical to establishing communities. Working together as a community enables humans to achieve much, including harnessing other animals for their use. More importantly to Sun Tzu, though not to the animals, within communities we make social distinctions that facilitate our interactions. Presumably this passage itself engages in making distinctions, although the kinds of distinctions Sun Tzu is interested in are those that are manifest in human relationships. The Mengzi likewise draws a hard line between humans and other animals based on our possession and their lack of moral capacities. It, however, is more emphatic about humanity's moral capacities, at times presenting the characteristics of non-human animals in a derogatory way, so as to elevate the place of morality in human life. For example, Mengzi criticizes those who lack some aspect of morality as being no more than beasts. He also points out that even if a person enjoys many aspects of a comfortable life, such as being fed, clothed, and housed, however, without being taught to be moral, they are almost like beasts. A more systematic way to understand what is meant by human nature is sketched by Aaron Stalnaker in his discussion of the debate between Mengzi and Sun Tzu, which lists 4 conceptions of human nature that may be at work in these texts. First, human nature may refer to what humans have in common. For example, when Mengzi says that all humans cannot bear to see a child about to come to harm, he means that this is a universal characteristic of humankind. Second, references to human nature may mean what is unique to humans. For Mengzi, the sprouts, such as benevolence and rightness, are what only humans have. Third, by speaking about human nature, we could draw attention to our shared characteristics and dispositions with other animals. The fourth perspective on human nature aims to draw attention to how it might be harmed or developed. Perhaps interventions from external sources are detrimental to human nature, as Yang Tzu seems to suggest. Or, according to Mengzi, the sprouts of human nature need to be nurtured, or, according to Sun Tzu, the self-serving tendencies of human nature must be restrained with ritual propriety and rightness. The aim of thinking about human nature within this discourse is to use it as a springboard upon which a program of self-cultivation may be justified. It shouldn't be surprising to find that a text such as the Mengzi refers to human nature in all 4 senses, as it seeks to establish a common, unique basis for morality. However, it is the what next question that most interested Mengzi and Sun Tzu, and those who debated with them. In the most general sense, the question of human nature was debated in order to understand what humans are capable of. In the Warring States context, thinkers were keen to develop a program that would alleviate the suffering of the people, and that could also facilitate moral progress. The specifics of each program say a lot about how each thinker viewed human achievements and weaknesses. As we know, Mengzi and Sun Tzu seem to be diametrically opposed in their views on the moral condition of human nature. Their different approaches to cultivation rely on different moral resources. Some resources are available to us because of the kind of beings we are, like Mengzi's central example that we cannot bear another person's suffering. And for Xunzi, teachers play a central role in guiding our attempts to apply standards to our lives. We'll get an idea of how they think about moral agency and what it means to be moral when we compare their approaches to cultivation. Let's begin with Mengzi's views in an important passage that presents an argument between Mengzi and Gaozi on exactly these issues. Little is known about Gaozi. We have access to his views only through a handful of texts that mention them. The Mengzi offers an extended debate between Mengzi and Gaozi, but there are questions about whether it properly represents Gaozi's views, given that the Mengzi takes Gaozi as an opponent and is thus hardly an unbiased source. Gaozi's views are most likely used to juxtapose Mengzi's own views on moral nature so as to bring out the best in the latter. In the Mengzi, Gaozi begins the debate with an analogy, saying that shaping benevolence and rightness from human nature is analogous to making cups and bowls from the willow tree. Mengzi responds swiftly and firmly, arguing that it is not possible to make cups and bowls from the willow tree without injuring it. Following this line of thought, Mengzi highlights the absurdity of the idea that human nature must be manipulated in order for humans to become virtuous. As the conversation continues, more detail emerges on their disagreement. Mengzi believes that our moral dispositions or inclinations are internal to human nature, which is to say that we are born with them. Gaozi disagrees, saying that while benevolence is internal to human nature, rightness is external to it. He illustrates his view by none too modestly giving himself as an example. Gaozi loves his own brother, he says, and this arises from within himself, thus demonstrating that benevolence is internal. Rightness is different and is displayed by Gaozi's serving an elder. According to what is prescribed by rightness, every elder is treated appropriately, not just elders from one's own family. The moral requirement derives from the age difference between Gaozi and the elder. This is connected with Gaozi's point that their relationship is external to the self and arises circumstantially. So, for Gaozi, our moral lives are not simply run from the heart, so to speak. We need to recognize at least two different sources of moral motivation, benevolence and rightness. Gaozi's illustrations also acknowledge more differentiation in the scope of morality than Mengzi's view does. Sometimes moral relationships grow out of a special bond, as within the family. Sometimes they are more a matter of principle, as with the case of treating all elders respectfully. Although these illustrations are limited, they prompt us to reconsider different reasons for why we should be moral. In other words, they diversify what we understand by the word morality as applied to these debates. Primarily, it seems that Mengzi's interest in human nature has to do with moral capacities or dispositions, but this disagreement with Gaozi focuses our attention on a different issue, namely that there are different reasons for our moral actions. Gaozi's views are similar to those we can find in other writings of this period, including the excavated text from Guojian. Had these texts not been found, we might believe that Gaozi held a minority position by distinguishing between internal and external sources of morality and exploring the diversity of moral reasons. The texts from the Guojian tomb are believed to have been circulating around the 3rd century BCE, which makes them roughly contemporaneous with the Mengzi and the Xunzi. The collection from Guojian includes known texts, such as the Lao Tzu, along with texts that were unknown before their discovery in 1993. In some of these, we find views resembling Gaozi's. For example, in the text named Six Virtues, or Liu De, which is believed to be aligned with Confucian views, the contrast between the internal and external is the basis for making moral distinctions. The Liu De states that Ren, benevolence, is internal, while Yi, rightness, is external. A metaphorical contrast is drawn between relationships that are within the gates of the family, that is, domestic relationships, and those outside these gates. Additionally, it picks out some relationships that belong to the internal domain and some to the external one. Here is the passage. Benevolence is internal, rightness is external. Propriety and music are common to both. Internal positions are father, son, husband. External positions are ruler, minister, wife. Within the gates, order is based on kindness holding check over rightness. Outside the gates, order is based on rightness, censuring kindness. Benevolence is gentle and cohesive, rightness is firm and binding. Benevolence is flexible and receptive, rightness is strong, uncompromising, and straightforward. This passage mentions a number of ideas we're already familiar with, but brings them together in a way we haven't yet seen. It draws a line between benevolence and rightness, allocating them different modes of operation in the context of different relationships. Benevolence is the gentle approach. It operates within the domestic context, is flexible, and has priority over rightness. By contrast, rightness is firm and binding, having priority over benevolence in relationships outside the domestic context. The distinction between a gentle approach and a firm one aligns with Gao Tzu's view that his loving his brother arises due to benevolence, whereas his treating an elder as an elder is based on rightness. His having to treat any elder in an appropriate way is firm, as the principle is based on the age difference between Gao Tzu and the elder. There is no room for compromise, so Gao Tzu cannot treat the elder on the basis of, say, whether he likes or dislikes him. All of which is plausible enough. Most of us would agree that some relationships are guided more by care, others more by moral duties. However, there's something in the Lü De passage we will find more difficult to accept. To draw a line between types of relationships, such that the husband, father, and son relationships are guided by gentle benevolence, but the relationship with a ruler, minister, or one's wife is guided by firm and uncompromising standards, is disconcerting. It affirms a lack of parity in the way the husband and wife roles are conceived, with the place of the husband firmly entrenched within the family context, whereas the wife enters into this domain from an external context, and she is to be treated firmly as if she were external to the household. This is because she marries in from another family. This issue of how women are viewed in warring states Confucian philosophy is troubling, and we will investigate it in a future episode. Another text from the Guojian tomb with Confucian views, the Thicket of Sayings, or the Yu Chong, also marks out different aspects of moral life based on particular relationships. It discusses how there is choice in a person's relationships with one's ruler, minister, or friends. These relationships, unlike those between father and son or between brothers, do not have that family closeness. Again, this sounds plausible. We could conceivably walk away from a relationship with a ruler, minister, or friend, but with our biological father or brother, even if we're not on the best terms, they will always be our father or brother. Indeed, we've seen examples of this already. Shun persevered in filiality towards his parents despite their horrendous treatment of him, whereas Kong Tzu chose to leave rulers who were unworthy of his services. For the author of the Yu Kong, and for the Confucians more generally, the spotlight is not merely on the biological aspects of relationships. The biological and the moral aspects dovetail in such a way that we have special obligations to those within the family. In another passage from the Yu Chong, the father-son relationship is thus distinguished from the ruler-minister relationship. If the ruler and minister do not support each other, the relationship may be terminated. However, filial piety and affection for one's son are not matters of choice, nor are they produced by deliberate action. That is, we cannot produce filial piety or affection by instilling it in ourselves from an external source. These texts help fill out our understanding of the Confucian debates on human nature. The view that benevolence is an inherent part of our human nature, whereas rightness is external to it, was not unique to Gao Tzu. The Guojian texts demonstrate that it was more prevalent within Confucianism, and perhaps that is why the Mengzi needed to include an extended conversation between Mengzi and Gao Tzu in order to defend its own view. These debates among the early Confucians incorporate relationships as key aspects of morality. In fact, to say that benevolence is inherent in human nature is to say that relational affection is an essential part of our humanity. These considerations complicate the conception of human nature in the Confucian tradition. If our moral capacities are part of our humanity, as Mengzi asserts, then what we need to do is develop these capacities. To fail to develop them would be analogous to our not pushing ourselves to exercise our muscles, for example. What a waste of those capacities. For Mengzi, a suitable aphorism concerning our moral capacities would be, use them or lose them. What we've just seen, of course, also shows that the Confucian tradition at this stage was not monolithic. It admitted of disagreement and debate. Which brings us back to the more famous contrast between Mengzi and Xunzi. Where Mengzi wanted us to tend to the sprouts of morality born within us, Xunzi believes that humans are primarily self-interested. We also saw that, in view of this belief, people become good through deliberate effort, rather than anything inherent in human nature. We bring this episode to a close by briefly considering how, in Xunzi's philosophy, it is possible to develop our commitment to a moral life, given that the resources for being moral are indeed external to us. On this point, although Xunzi's views on human nature seem pessimistic, His views on how we can turn humanity's unthinking and selfish impulses around are definitely worth considering. Xunzi highlights the many capacities we're able to develop in order to grow a more acute moral sensibility to what matters. At the center of our moral life is the heart mind. It is the heavenly lord of a person, controlling the five faculties: the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and body. The heart mind is the capacity that ponders and deliberates. It engages in slow thinking that overrides our rash impulses. For Xunzi, morality is also caught up in our emotions, our dispositions, and our desires. All these aspects of humanity can and should be cultivated so that we are appropriately attuned to social distinctions, we embody ritual propriety, and get our moral priorities right. Scholars are particularly interested in how Xunzi's philosophy contributes to our understanding of moral psychology. Broadly speaking, moral psychology is an interdisciplinary area of inquiry which brings together empirical research on our moral behaviors with philosophical theories about morality. Xunzi's particular contribution to these issues relates to how our different capacities may be developed in order that we are motivated to be moral. Since he rejects Mengzi's optimistic claim that this motivation is inborn, he proposes that various elements of our moral environment, such as ritual propriety, rightness, and the Tao of the sages, need to be embedded in society. Through the guidance of teachers and models, we may take on these practices ourselves to develop the proper kinds of responses in different circumstances. The process of repeatedly practicing appropriate responses is called accumulation, in Chinese qi, and Xunzi provides a fairly detailed account of how accumulation can help transform us morally. Human nature is something I cannot remake, but it can be transformed. Practice and habituation are the means to transform human nature. Being devoted to one thing and not departing from it are the means to bring about accumulated effort. Habituation changes your intentions, and being able to take comfort in such things and persist in them changes your substance. If you accumulate soil, you will form a mountain. If you accumulate water, you will form a sea. If ordinary men in the street and the common people accumulate goodness and make it whole and complete, they are called sages. What Xunzi's Tao, his way, offers is not merely a story of disciplining ourselves by acting in certain ways so that, after a period of time, these actions become habitual because we've stopped considering other options. The process of accumulation shapes our sensibilities and transforms our motivations, orienting them toward a vision that delights in moral virtue. Xunzi's views on accumulation and cultivation provide an interesting way to think about moral life, whereby we learn to be moral by carrying out the right kinds of actions and by practicing behavioral propriety. If this is right, then being moral is not a case of applying moral values. Rather, our moral values are shaped by the norms around us and the teachers and models that influence us. Together with the other Confucians, Xunzi's philosophy of cultivation rests on a belief in the malleability of human nature. People often say, "You are what you eat," but for Xunzi, you are what you do. Having just touched on moral psychology and explored questions of human nature throughout this episode, we've already dipped a toe into the broader philosophical waters that surround the more familiar landscape of Confucian ethics. We'll plunge in still further in the next episode by asking what the classical Confucians have to say about knowledge, what it is, how we can acquire it, and how we can reliably put it into practice. So be sure to join us next time for Confucian epistemology, here on the History of Philosophy in China.